Martha Jenkins, a 93-year-old mother, sat quietly on her porch, her weathered hands resting gently on her lap as she gazed out at the quiet street of Brooksville. Life in this small town was usually uneventful, and the people knew each other like family. Martha, despite her age, was a symbol of resilience in Brooksville. She was a woman who had faced more trials than most could ever imagine, and her story was a testament to both sacrifice and love. Martha had 5 children, all of whom had served in the military. They were brave soldiers, each willing to risk everything for their country. 3 of them never made it back home. They were lost in the throes of war, fighting for the freedom and values they believed in. Their sacrifices were immeasurable, and they had given their lives to protect others. Every day, Martha bore the weight of this loss. The pain was constant, but it was interwoven with immense pride. Her children had fought for something greater than themselves, and that was a legacy that could never be forgotten. Despite her advanced age, Martha was still sharp-minded. The years had taken their toll on her body, but her spirit was unbreakable. She spent most of her days reminiscing about her children and their courage. In her heart, she carried not only the love she had for them, but also the sense of duty that they had instilled in her. She knew that no matter what, she would honor their memory by standing strong in the face of adversity, just as they had. On a seemingly peaceful afternoon, Martha sat on her old rocking chair, the creaking sound of wood echoing softly in the warm breeze. Her eyes scanned the quiet neighborhood, where children played, and neighbors greeted each other warmly. Brooksville seemed untouched by the troubles of the world, but Martha knew that danger could lurk even in the most tranquil places. Suddenly, the sound of roaring engines broke the serene atmosphere. Martha's head turned towards the source of the commotion, her eyes narrowing as she saw a group of motorcycles speeding down the street, heading straight for her house. It was Rex and his gang, a group of notorious criminals who had been causing trouble in the town. They were known for their intimidation tactics, and they had been terrorizing the neighborhood for weeks. Today, it seemed, they had decided to target Martha. The gang, led by Rex, came to a screeching halt in front of her yard. Rex, a tall, imposing figure with a menacing look, dismounted his bike, followed by his rowdy group of thugs. Martha watched them approach, her expression unwavering. She had seen enough in her life to know that fear was not an option. Rex sauntered up to her porch, his boots crunching against the gravel. He looked at Martha with a sneer, his eyes full of mockery. "Well, well, if it isn't the old lady herself," he taunted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. His goons laughed behind him, their voices echoing in the otherwise quiet street. Martha remained silent, her gaze steady as she looked at Rex. She had faced enemies far more dangerous than him, and she wasn't about to be intimidated by a group of petty criminals. Rex seemed annoyed by her lack of reaction. He stepped closer, knocking over a small table next to her rocking chair, sending her teacup crashing to the ground. The porcelain shattered into pieces, but Martha didn't flinch. "What's the matter, old woman? Cat got your tongue?" Rex sneered, clearly trying to provoke her. His henchmen jeered, adding to the chaos. The gang had grown used to people cowering before them, but Martha was different. She was not one to back down, and certainly not in her own home. Martha slowly leaned forward, her eyes locking with Rex's. Her voice was calm, almost serene, as she spoke. "You boys have had your fun. Now, it's time for you to leave." There was no fear in her voice, only a quiet authority that took Rex by surprise. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to react. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a 93-year-old woman. Rex laughed, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "And what are you going to do about it, Grandma?" "Call the cops," he mocked, leaning closer to her. Martha didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out an old flip phone. She held it up, her fingers steady as she began to dial a number. Rex and his gang burst into laughter. "Who are you calling? Your knitting club?" one of them shouted, eliciting more laughter. Martha ignored their taunts. She brought the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving Rex's face. "William," she said into the phone, her voice calm but firm. "It's time. I need your help." There was a moment of silence, and then a voice on the other end responded. It was General William Carter, the commander of the U.S. Army, an old friend who owed Martha a great debt. Martha had been a nurse during the war, and she had saved many lives, including Carter's. He had never forgotten her bravery and had promised to be there if she ever needed him. Rex frowned, his bravado faltering as he saw the seriousness in Martha's eyes. "Who are you talking to, old lady?" he demanded, but Martha didn't answer. She simply closed the phone and placed it back in her pocket. The calm confidence in her demeanor unsettled Rex. He had expected fear, but instead, he found himself facing a woman who seemed completely unafraid. "You should leave," Martha said once more, her voice steady. Rex hesitated, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He stepped closer, but before he could say anything more, the distant sound of sirens began to grow louder. Rex's eyes widened in confusion as he looked down the street. Within moments, a convoy of military vehicles appeared, speeding towards them. Rex turned back to Martha, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. "What did you do?" he muttered, but Martha didn't answer. She simply watched as the convoy came to a stop in front of her house. Soldiers poured out of the vehicles, their weapons at the ready. Leading them was General William Carter himself. "Step away from the lady," General Carter commanded, his voice booming with authority. Rex and his gang were frozen in place, their earlier arrogance replaced by fear. They had never imagined that an old woman could wield such power. Martha slowly stood up, her eyes still on Rex. "You thought you could intimidate me," she said quietly. "But you underestimated who I am and what I stand for." Rex, now surrounded by soldiers, had no choice but to comply as they were handcuffed and led away. As the gang was taken into custody, General Carter approached Martha, a look of respect in his eyes. "You never cease to amaze me, Martha," he said, his voice softer now. Martha gave him a small smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I just did what I had to do," she replied. "For my family, for my town." General Carter nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Martha Jenkins was not just an elderly mother, she was a warrior in her own right, a woman who had faced loss and pain but had never given up. And today, she had shown everyone that true courage knows no age. Despite her age, Martha remained remarkably calm. The air was thick with tension, but she faced Rex and his gang without a hint of fear. They had pushed her to her limit, and she knew it was time to act. She looked at Rex with steady eyes and simply said, "I'm going to make a call." Rex's henchmen burst into laughter, their mocking voices filling the air. They dismissed her words as meaningless, assuming she would call for some sort of local help that they could easily overpower. They had no idea who Martha Jenkins was or the connections she had built over a lifetime of bravery and sacrifice. What they saw was just an old woman, a mistaken underestimation that would cost them dearly. Martha, her resolve unshaken, pulled out an old flip phone from her cardigan pocket. The phone was worn and battered, much like Martha herself, but it still worked perfectly. She knew exactly who she needed to call. Instead of contacting her son or any local authority, she decided to reach out to the most powerful person she knew, General William Carter, the commander of the U.S. Army. General William Carter was not just a high-ranking official. He was a man who had fought alongside Martha during the war. Martha had served as a military nurse, saving countless lives, including Carter's. Back then, she had been a beacon of hope for the wounded, her hands steady even as chaos erupted around her. Carter never forgot the woman who had pulled him through one of the darkest moments of his life. He owed her more than he could ever repay, and Martha knew that. This was a debt she was finally calling in. As the phone rang, the gang continued to jeer. "Who are you calling, Grandma?" "Your bridge club," one of them taunted, eliciting more laughter. Rex looked amused, his eyes filled with condescension. But Martha ignored them, her attention focused solely on the call. The ringing stopped, and a voice answered on the other end. "Martha." It was General Carter. His voice was gruff, but there was an unmistakable warmth there, a respect that he held for very few people. "William," Martha said, her voice unwavering. "It's time. I need your help." There was a brief pause on the other end. Carter instantly understood the gravity of her words. He knew Martha well enough to recognize that she would never ask for help unless it was absolutely necessary. "Where are you?" he asked, his tone shifting from friendly to authoritative in an instant. "Brooksville." "At my house," Martha replied, her gaze still locked on Rex, who had stopped smiling and was now looking at her with a frown. "Hang tight." "We're coming," General Carter said before the line went dead. Martha closed the phone and slipped it back into her pocket, her expression calm. Rex's laughter had faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. "Who the hell did you just call?" Rex demanded, stepping closer, his bravado beginning to wane. Martha met his eyes, her voice steady. "Someone who can handle you," she said simply. Rex scowled, clearly not expecting this level of confidence from the elderly woman. He was used to fear, used to people backing down. But Martha stood her ground, and her unflinching demeanor unsettled him. Minutes passed, and the tension in the air thickened. Rex's henchmen shuffled nervously, their earlier bravado beginning to wane as well. They could sense something had shifted, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. Martha remained still, her eyes never leaving Rex's face. Then, in the distance, came the unmistakable sound of approaching sirens. The wail grew louder, joined by the rumble of engines much heavier than those of police cars. Rex's head snapped around, his eyes widening as he saw a convoy of military vehicles speeding down the street, kicking up dust as they approached. What the hell is this?" Rex muttered, his face paling. The military convoy came to a screeching halt in front of Martha's house, and soldiers poured out, their weapons ready. The leader of the group, a tall man in full military gear, strode confidently towards the porch. It was General William Carter himself. "Step away from her," General Carter's voice boomed, filled with authority. The soldiers behind him formed a line, their presence imposing and impossible to ignore. Rex and his men were frozen in place, the realization of their mistake dawning on them too late. Rex stammered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "We were just having a little fun," he said, though his voice lacked the earlier confidence. The soldiers moved forward, surrounding Rex and his gang, weapons raised but not yet fired. General Carter ignored Rex and turned to Martha, his stern expression softening. "Are you all right, Martha?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Martha nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I'm fine, William." "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. General Carter nodded, then turned his attention back to Rex. "You think you can terrorize innocent people? You think you can intimidate this woman? You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said coldly. He gestured to his men, and within moments, Rex and his henchmen were being handcuffed and led away, their earlier arrogance replaced by fear and confusion. As the gang was loaded into the military vehicles, General Carter walked back to Martha. He looked at her with admiration. "You never cease to amaze me," he said quietly. Martha shrugged slightly, her eyes twinkling. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied. "For my family, for my town." General Carter smiled, nodding in agreement. "And you did it well," he said. He offered her his arm, and Martha took it, allowing him to help her back into her house. The crisis had passed, but the memory of what had happened would linger, both for the townspeople who witnessed it and for Rex's gang, who learned the hard way that some people, no matter their age, are not to be underestimated. Martha Jenkins had once again proven that true courage knows no bounds, not age, not circumstance, and certainly not fear. And as she sat back down in her rocking chair, watching the military vehicles disappear down the road, she knew that her children would have been proud of her. Today, she had stood her ground, not just for herself but for the legacy of her family, and for the town she called home. Within minutes, the sound of roaring engines and the blare of sirens echoed throughout Brooksville. The quiet little town was suddenly alive with the sounds of a military convoy, and the tension in the air was palpable. Under General Carter's command, a special forces team had been dispatched to secure Martha's safety and deal with the situation once and for all. The convoy's arrival was swift, and it left no room for ambiguity. This was no ordinary intervention. This was the power of the U.S. Army, arriving to protect one of their own. The convoy came to a halt in front of Martha's house, and the soldiers moved with precision and purpose. General Carter, wearing his military uniform, stepped out of the lead vehicle. His expression was one of determination, his eyes scanning the scene to assess any immediate threat. Martha sat calmly on her porch, watching as the soldiers took their positions. Rex and his gang, on the other hand, were frozen in place, unable to fully grasp what was happening. They had assumed they were dealing with an elderly woman, someone they could easily intimidate. But now, it was clear that they had made a grave mistake. Rex's bravado had vanished, replaced by an uneasy confusion. He watched as General Carter walked towards Martha, his every step echoing authority. Behind him, soldiers formed a protective perimeter, their weapons at the ready. Rex's men began to shift uneasily, their earlier confidence dwindling in the face of the overwhelming force that had descended upon them. General Carter approached Martha, his face softening as he saw her. He extended his hand, and Martha took it, rising slowly to her feet. "Are you all right, Martha?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Martha nodded, her gaze steady. "I'm fine, William." "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice carrying both relief and a quiet strength. General Carter gave her a small smile before turning his attention to Rex and his gang. The smile faded, replaced by a hardened expression. He raised his voice, his tone commanding. "You boys picked the wrong house and the wrong woman," he said. The soldiers around him moved in unison, stepping forward to surround the gang. Rex swallowed hard, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in. They had been expecting fear, submission, perhaps even a plea for mercy. Instead, they were now facing an elite special forces team, led by a man who clearly had no intention of letting them leave without consequences. The soldiers moved with calculated efficiency. They separated Rex from his men, handcuffing them one by one. Rex tried to protest, his voice cracking as he attempted to explain. We were just messing around," he stammered, but his words were drowned out by the sound of orders being given and soldiers moving to secure the area. Martha stood by, her eyes never leaving Rex. She knew this was just the beginning. The gang might be getting arrested, but there was more to be done. Her son Nathan, who had been monitoring the situation from a distance, had set up a secure connection to help keep track of the gang's activities. With General Carter and his team ensuring her safety, Martha felt confident that they could dismantle whatever larger operation Rex and his gang were a part of. Rex was led to one of the military vehicles, his wrists bound in front of him. He glanced back at Martha, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and confusion. "Who are you?" he muttered, almost to himself. Martha, her posture straight, looked at him calmly. "I'm just a mother," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of all her years and all her losses. "A mother who won't let people like you destroy what my family fought for." General Carter nodded approvingly at Martha's words. He turned to his men, giving quick, decisive orders. "I want a full sweep of the area. Make sure there are no other threats. We're not leaving until we're certain that Martha is safe and these men are properly secured." The soldiers acknowledged his commands, moving swiftly to ensure the safety of the area. As the soldiers began to fan out, searching the perimeter, Martha returned to her rocking chair, her body tired but her spirit unwavering. She knew this was far from over. The gang members might be in custody, but there were still unanswered questions. Chief among them, who was backing Rex? She had a feeling that this local gang was just a piece of a much larger puzzle. The way they had terrorized the neighborhood, their audacity, it all pointed to something bigger, something more organized. General Carter stayed close, his eyes scanning the scene while occasionally glancing at Martha. He admired her strength. She was no ordinary woman, and her courage reminded him of the soldiers he had fought alongside. She had faced down a gang of criminals without a hint of fear, and now she sat quietly, as if this were just another day in her long, storied life. "Martha," he said, turning towards her, "we're going to get to the bottom of this. Whoever is behind Rex and his gang, we'll find them." Martha nodded, her expression one of determination. "I know you will, William. But I want to be involved. This isn't just about me. It's about my family, about everyone in this town." General Carter looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. We'll do this together," he agreed. As the sun began to set over Brooksville, the once chaotic scene began to calm. The soldiers had secured the area, and Rex's gang members were loaded into the military vehicles, ready to be transported. General Carter made sure everything was in order before returning to Martha's side. "We'll take these men in for questioning. I'll keep you updated on everything we find," he assured her. Martha gave him a grateful smile. "Thank you, William. I trust you." She paused for a moment, then added, "And thank you for remembering your promise." General Carter shook his head, a hint of a smile on his lips. "How could I forget? You saved my life, Martha. This is the least I can do." The convoy began to pull away, the sound of engines fading into the distance. The townspeople, who had watched the scene unfold from behind closed doors and drawn curtains, slowly began to emerge. They approached Martha, their faces filled with awe and admiration. She had stood her ground against a gang of criminals and had brought in the might of the U.S. military to protect their town. To them, she was more than just an elderly woman. She was a hero. One of the neighbors, a young mother named Lisa, approached the porch, her young son clinging to her leg. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said hesitantly, "thank you. You've made all of us feel safer today." Martha looked at Lisa and then at the child beside her. She smiled gently, her eyes softening. "We all have to protect what we love, Lisa," she replied. "Today, it was my turn. Tomorrow, it might be yours." As night fell, Brooksville returned to an uneasy calm. The threat had been removed, but Martha knew this was just the beginning of a larger fight. With General Carter and her son Nathan by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. She had fought for her country, and now she would fight for her home. No matter what it took, Martha Jenkins was determined to see justice done, for her family, for her neighbors, and for the town she called home. Martha Jenkins stood on the porch of her old weathered home, her eyes locked on the road that led to her front yard. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the world in twilight shadows, but the tension that hung in the air was palpable. She knew they would be back. Rex's gang had already proven that they weren't the kind to accept defeat quietly. With the assistance of General Carter and McCaffrey, an old military commander she had once served alongside, Martha was determined to continue tracking down Victor Lang, the elusive head of the criminal organization that Rex's gang was a part of. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. General Carter had stationed his special forces at strategic points around the property, ensuring that they had a clear line of sight from every angle. McCaffrey, a man whose experience in combat was unmatched, was working closely with the team to ensure that they were ready for whatever was to come. Martha, despite her age, refused to be sidelined. She had lived her entire life standing up for what was right, and she wasn't about to stop now. It was almost midnight when the first sounds of approaching vehicles reached her ears. Martha could feel her heart begin to pound, but she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had faced loss, danger, and uncertainty throughout her life. Tonight would be no different. She turned her head slightly, catching General Carter's eye. He gave her a reassuring nod, his gaze unwavering. They were ready. The roar of engines grew louder, and soon, the headlights of several vehicles cut through the darkness, coming to a stop just outside Martha's property. The unmistakable figures of Rex and his gang members emerged from the trucks, their silhouettes casting long, threatening shadows across the yard. They moved with a confidence that belied their ignorance of what awaited them. Rex stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Martha, a sneer spreading across his face. "Well, well, the old lady is still here," Rex taunted, his voice carrying through the still night. His men chuckled behind him, their weapons glinting in the dim light. "Didn't we tell you we'd be back?" Martha didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her chin slightly, her eyes meeting Rex's with an intensity that caught him off guard. Before he could say anything more, the silence of the night was shattered by the sudden movement of Special Forces soldiers stepping into view. From the trees, the sides of the house, and the shadows, they appeared with precision, their weapons aimed at Rex and his men. "Drop your weapons!" General Carter's voice boomed, filled with authority. The soldiers moved in synchronized formation, their presence formidable and unmistakable. Rex's confidence faltered, his eyes darting around as he realized the extent of the trap they had walked into. McCaffrey stepped forward, his eyes hard as he stared down Rex. "You should have stayed away," he said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of someone who had seen his share of battles. "This isn't your territory anymore." Rex's face twisted in anger. "You think you can scare us?" he spat, his hands tightening around his weapon. But before he could make another move, a gunshot rang out, a warning shot from one of the soldiers, hitting the ground just inches from Rex's feet. "I said, drop your weapons," General Carter repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. This time, Rex hesitated. He looked around, seeing his men surrounded, the red laser sights of the soldiers' rifles trained on them. Slowly, reluctantly, he motioned for his men to comply. One by one, they dropped their weapons, the metallic clang echoing in the tense silence. The special forces moved in swiftly, securing Rex and his gang members. The soldiers worked with a practiced efficiency, their movements almost a blur as they disarmed and restrained the criminals. Rex, now handcuffed, was forced down onto his knees, his face a mask of rage and frustration. He glared up at General Carter, his voice filled with venom. "You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into," he snarled. General Carter didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at Rex. "Why don't you tell us then?" he said coolly. "Who are you working for? Where's Victor Lang?" For a moment, Rex remained silent, his jaw clenched. But then McCaffrey stepped forward, his presence looming over Rex like a shadow. "You can either talk now, or we can make this a lot harder for you," McCaffrey said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Your choice." Rex hesitated, then finally he broke. He glanced around, his bravado shattered. All right, he snapped. "Victor Lang. He's the one calling the shots. He's got operations all over. Drugs, weapons, you name it." General Carter exchanged a look with McCaffrey, then nodded. "Where is he?" he demanded. Rex swallowed, his eyes dotting nervously. "He's got a hideout, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. But you'll never get to him. He's got security, real security. Not like us." General Carter straightened, his expression resolute. "We'll take our chances," he said. He turned to his men, giving quick orders to begin securing the area and prepare for a move on Lang's hideout. As the soldiers moved to carry out his commands, Martha watched from her porch, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and determination. Nathan, Martha's son, had been monitoring everything from a safe distance. Through the secure connection he had established, he was able to provide real-time updates to General Carter and McCaffrey. Nathan's voice crackled through the comms unit on Carter's shoulder. "I've got eyes on the warehouse," he said. "Looks like Rex wasn't lying. There's heavy security. But I think I can help you find a way in." General Carter nodded, his gaze shifting back to Martha. He gave her a reassuring smile. "We're going to put an end to this, Martha. Victor Lang's days are numbered." Martha nodded, her eyes glistening with determination. "Thank you, William," she said quietly, "for everything." The night wasn't over yet, and the battle was far from won. But tonight, Martha had seen the beginning of the end for those who threatened her home. With General Carter, McCaffrey, and Nathan by her side, she knew they would see this through to the finish. They had the courage, the strength, and most importantly, the unity needed to face whatever lay ahead. As the soldiers loaded Rex and his gang into the waiting military vehicles, Martha watched them disappear into the darkness. She turned her gaze towards the horizon, where the faint lights of the city glowed in the distance. Somewhere out there, Victor Lang was hiding, thinking he was untouchable. But Martha knew better. No one was untouchable when faced with the unyielding spirit of those determined to bring justice. She took a deep breath, her resolve only growing stronger. The battle had come to her doorstep, but she had not faced it alone. Her family's sacrifices, her own courage, and the loyalty of friends like General Carter and McCaffrey were all part of the legacy she carried forward. And she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. With the special forces regrouping and preparations being made for the next phase, Martha finally allowed herself a moment of rest. She sat back down on her rocking chair, her eyes closing briefly as the cool night breeze brushed against her face. She was tired, but she was ready for whatever came next. The fight against Victor Lang would not be easy, but Martha Jenkins had never been one to back down from a challenge. She had faced the worst life could throw at her and had emerged stronger each time. And now, as she looked towards the uncertain road ahead, she knew one thing for certain. She would see this through, for her family, for her town, and for herself. This was her stand, and she would not falter. The night was still as General Carter, McCaffrey, and the Special Forces team assembled quietly at their staging area, waiting for the final signal. The FBI had joined them, adding additional layers of coordination and firepower. Victor Lang's hideout, a massive, seemingly impenetrable warehouse at the edge of town, loomed in the distance. Its shadow stretched across the barren lot, guarded by high fences and security cameras that scanned every angle. The stage was set, and tonight would decide everything. Martha Jenkins, despite her age, was resolute. She insisted on coming along, sitting safely in one of the armored vehicles, wanting to witness firsthand the culmination of everything they had fought for. General Carter had reluctantly agreed. He knew that trying to stop her would be a losing battle. Martha had given too much, lost too much, and there was nothing that could keep her from seeing justice done. As the convoy approached the warehouse, the tension was palpable. This was the moment they had been preparing for, and the success of their mission hinged on precision and strength. Nathan, Martha's son, sat in a command vehicle with multiple screens in front of him. He had managed to hack into the security system, providing the team with live feeds of Lang's hideout. He gave a final nod to General Carter, his eyes sharp and focused. "We've disabled their external security cameras. You've got a window, but it's not going to last forever," he said over the comms. General Carter nodded, the seriousness of the moment etched on his face. He raised his hand, giving the signal for the operation to begin. The convoy split, surrounding the warehouse from all sides, while heavily armed agents moved in under the cover of darkness. The hum of drones flying overhead filled the air, their cameras feeding information directly to Nathan's monitors. Every move was calculated, every step rehearsed. Tonight, there could be no room for mistakes. The soldiers moved in, cutting through the outer fence with bolt cutters, each team member taking their position silently. General Carter and McCaffrey led from the front, their years of combat experience guiding their every move. As they approached the main building, a loudspeaker blared suddenly, the voice of Victor Lang echoing through the empty lot. "I know you're out there. You think you can take me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Lang's voice was filled with bravado, but Martha could hear the fear that laced his words. She watched from her vantage point in the vehicle, her heart pounding in her chest. This man was responsible for so much pain and suffering, not only to her but to countless others. She clenched her hands tightly, her knuckles white as she stared at the warehouse. This was it. The special forces breached the door, their movements swift and synchronized. Flashbangs were tossed inside, bright bursts of light and loud bangs echoing as they entered. Chaos erupted immediately. Lang's guards scrambled, trying to fight back, but they were no match for the well-trained special forces. The air filled with shouting, the crack of gunfire, and the sounds of a fierce struggle. Victor Lang, caught by surprise, tried to flee. He pushed his way through the narrow corridors of the warehouse, his heart pounding as he stumbled over crates and equipment. He had always believed himself to be untouchable, always 2 steps ahead of the law. But tonight, he found himself cornered. His men were falling one by one, overwhelmed by the coordinated assault, and there was nowhere left to run. McCaffrey and General Carter moved through the maze of hallways, their weapons drawn and ready. They were close. Nathan's guidance had brought them right to Lang's hiding spot. "He's on the move, heading towards the east exit," Nathan's voice crackled through their earpieces. "You've got to cut him off before he reaches the car waiting outside." Carter nodded, signaling to McCaffrey. They split up, moving to intercept Lang. Carter rounded a corner just in time to see Lang pushing open a metal door, the cool night air rushing in. "Stop right there," Carter shouted, his voice echoing in the narrow space. Lang turned, his face pale and eyes wide with panic. He hesitated for a moment, then bolted. Carter moved quickly, pursuing him across the lot. Lang was fast, but Carter was relentless, driven by a determination that far surpassed Lang's desperation. Just as Lang reached the edge of the lot, a figure stepped out of the shadows, McCaffrey. He moved with practiced ease, tackling Lang to the ground, pinning him down before he could escape. Lang struggled, but McCaffrey's grip was ironclad. "It's over, Lang," he said, his voice steady. "You're not going anywhere." Within moments, the special forces surrounded them, weapons trained on Lang as he was pulled to his feet and handcuffed. His bravado was gone, replaced by the grim realization that his empire had just crumbled around him. Martha watched from a distance as Lang was led away, the lights from the military vehicles casting harsh shadows across his face. For the first time in years, she felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. The man who had caused so much harm was finally facing justice. She thought of her children, of their sacrifices, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was for them. This was for every innocent person who had suffered because of Victor Lang's greed and cruelty. The soldiers began to sweep the warehouse, securing evidence and rounding up the remaining members of Lang's organization. General Carter made his way back to Martha, his expression softening as he saw her. He opened the vehicle door, helping her step out. "It's done, Martha," he said gently. "Lang is finished." Martha looked at him, her eyes filled with both relief and gratitude. "Thank you, William," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "For everything. For keeping your promise." General Carter nodded, his eyes reflecting the respect he held for her. "You've always been the bravest person I know, Martha." This was the least I could do. Martha turned her gaze towards the warehouse, watching as the FBI agents and soldiers moved in and out, carrying boxes of evidence, securing the scene. The air was filled with the chatter of radios and the hum of engines. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The convoy began to prepare for departure, and Martha was escorted back to her vehicle. As they drove away, she looked out the window, watching as the warehouse grew smaller in the distance. The lights of Brooksville glimmered beyond, a reminder of everything she had fought to protect. Tonight, justice had been served, and the town could finally begin to heal. The following days were a blur of activity. News of the raid spread quickly, and the townspeople of Brooksville were filled with both shock and relief. They had lived in fear of Rex's gang and the influence of Victor Lang for too long, and now they could finally breathe freely. The streets were filled with an energy that had been missing for years. Children playing, neighbors greeting each other, people walking without fear. Martha returned to her home, her rocking chair waiting for her on the porch. She sat down, the familiar creak of the wood comforting. Nathan joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. "You really did it." Martha smiled, her eyes misting over. "We did it," she corrected him. "All of us. Your brothers would be proud." Nathan nodded, swallowing hard as he looked out at the quiet street. He knew she was right. This victory was for all of them, a tribute to the sacrifices his brothers had made and the strength of their family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Martha closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of her town, sounds of laughter, of life, of freedom. Brooksville had been through so much, but tonight, it was a place of hope once more. And as long as she had breath in her body, Martha Jenkins would be there to protect it. Justice had prevailed. The criminal organization had been dismantled, and Brooksville was finally at peace. Martha knew there would always be challenges, but she also knew that she, and the town, were ready to face them. She had stood her ground, fought for what was right, and emerged victorious. And for that, she was eternally grateful. This was not just the end of a battle, it was the beginning of a new chapter for Brooksville, a chapter filled with hope, resilience, and the enduring spirit of those who refused to be broken. Martha Jenkins, at 93 years old, had once again proven that true strength lies not in physical power but in the courage to stand up for what is right, no matter the cost. And in doing so, she had left a legacy that would inspire future generations to do the same. After the assault on Victor Lang's hideout, Martha Jenkins returned home. The old rocking chair on her porch was waiting for her, just as it always had. She settled into it with a deep sigh, her body weary but her spirit calm. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past few days had subsided, leaving behind a sense of quiet fulfillment. She looked out at the street, now tranquil in the soft glow of the evening light. It was the same street she had watched over for so many years, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt free. Nathan, her son, sat beside her on the porch, pulling up an old wooden chair next to her. They both sat in silence, enjoying the peaceful moment they had fought so hard to reclaim. Nathan looked over at his mother, a small smile tugging at his lips. She was a sight to behold, 93 years old, but still full of fire and determination. She had faced down dangers that would have made most people crumble, and she had come out victorious. "You know, Mom," Nathan said, breaking the silence, "you could have stayed home and let us handle it. But I think we all knew you wouldn't." His voice was filled with admiration. Martha looked at him, her eyes softening. "I had to be there," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I needed to see it through, to see that man brought to justice. Not just for me, but for your brothers. For everyone who has suffered because of people like him." Nathan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. This was more than just a fight for justice, it was a fight for closure. Martha had lost 3 of her sons to war, brave young men who had given their lives to protect the freedoms that Victor Lang had tried to take away. She could never get them back, but tonight, she had honored their memory in the only way she knew how, by standing up for what they believed in. In the days that followed, Brooksville began to restore its tranquility. The town, which had been gripped by fear for far too long, finally began to relax. The oppressive shadow that had loomed over the community lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of hope. The townspeople recognized the courage and sacrifice that had led to their newfound freedom. They saw in Martha a symbol of resilience, someone who, despite her age, had never given up on them. Martha's story spread quickly, and soon, her name was on everyone's lips. People spoke of the elderly mother who had faced down a notorious crime boss, the woman who had called in the U.S. Army and brought justice to Brooksville. She became a symbol of hope, an example of what one person could do if they refused to be intimidated. The younger generation, in particular, looked up to her. They visited her, sitting on her porch to listen to her stories. She spoke to them about courage, about standing up for what was right, and about the importance of protecting their family and community. For Martha, these moments were precious. She had always believed in the power of community, and now she could see that belief taking root in the young people of Brooksville. They listened intently as she spoke, their eyes wide with admiration. She shared stories of her children, of their bravery, and the sacrifices they had made. She wanted them to understand that freedom came at a cost, but it was a cost worth paying. She wanted them to know that the love of family and devotion to justice could bring about great change, no matter how daunting the challenge. One afternoon, as she sat with a group of children gathered around her rocking chair, one of them, a young girl named Emily, looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Mrs. Jenkins," she asked, "weren't you scared when those bad men came to your house?" Martha paused, considering the question. She looked at the little girl, her eyes kind. "Yes, Emily," she said honestly. "I was scared. Being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared. My children taught me that, and it's something I'll always carry with me." Emily nodded thoughtfully, and Martha could see the determination in her young eyes. It was moments like this that made everything worthwhile. Martha knew that the battle she had fought, both in her youth and now, at 93, had not been in vain. Her children's sacrifices had not been in vain. Their spirit lived on, not just in her, but in every person who heard their story and chose to stand up for what was right. Brooksville, once a quiet town overshadowed by the threat of crime, was now a place of unity and resilience. The people had come together, supporting one another as they rebuilt their lives. Neighbors who had once kept their doors closed out of fear now gathered in the evenings, sharing laughter and stories. The spirit of the town had been renewed, and Martha felt an immense sense of pride knowing that she had played a part in that transformation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan joined his mother on the porch once again. He handed her a cup of tea, and they sat together in silence, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. "Do you think it's really over?" Nathan asked quietly, his eyes on the horizon. Martha took a sip of her tea, her gaze thoughtful. "I think there will always be challenges," she said. "But I also think we're ready for them. This town, these people, they know what it means to fight for what's right. And as long as we stand together, we can face anything." Nathan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. His mother had always been the strongest person he knew, and now the whole town knew it too. Martha Jenkins, at 93 years old, had faced down enemies that would have made most people run. She had done it for her family, for her community, and for herself. And in doing so, she had proven that true courage and strength came not from physical power, but from an unwavering commitment to protect the ones you love. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Martha leaned back in her rocking chair, a contented smile on her face. She knew that her journey was far from over. There would always be new battles, new challenges. But she was ready. She had faced the worst life could throw at her and had emerged victorious, not once, but time and time again. And as she looked out at the quiet street of Brooksville, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had fought for her family, for her town, and for the ideals she held dear. And she had won. The love she carried for her children, the pride she felt in their sacrifices, and the courage she found within herself had brought her to this moment. And that, she knew, was a victory that could never be taken away. Martha Jenkins was not just a mother or a hero. She was a testament to the power of resilience, love, and justice. And as long as she had breath in her body, she would continue to be a beacon of hope for all who knew her story. Brooksville not only regained its peace but became stronger. The assault on Victor Lang's criminal empire had not only dismantled a dangerous network but also inspired the people of the town. The townspeople, who had once lived in fear, realized that they could no longer allow fear to control their lives. They learned that unity was their greatest strength, and they were determined never to let their community fall prey to such darkness again. In the weeks that followed, the transformation of Brooksville was evident in every corner of the town. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began coming together, supporting each other and sharing in the rebuilding efforts. The once quiet streets now bustled with life as people took pride in their community. They painted over the graffiti that Rex's gang had left behind, fixed broken windows, and repaired the damage that had been done. It was not just about restoring buildings, it was about reclaiming their town. The young people of Brooksville, especially those who had witnessed the events firsthand, were deeply impacted. They saw the bravery of Martha Jenkins, the resilience of their neighbors, and the power of standing up for what was right. Inspired by Martha's courage, many of them began to volunteer in community activities. They organized neighborhood watches, helped with cleanup projects, and even began initiatives to support the elderly and vulnerable members of the community. They were determined to protect their town from any potential threats and to make Brooksville a place where everyone felt safe. Martha became a mentor to many of these young people. They would come to her porch, sitting around her rocking chair as she shared her life lessons with them. She spoke of the wars her children had fought, of their sacrifices, and of the reasons they had been willing to lay down their lives. She wanted the young generation to understand that freedom was not something that could be taken for granted, it was something that had to be earned and protected. Martha's stories were not just tales of the past, they were lessons for the future, lessons about bravery, sacrifice, and the importance of community. One evening, as Martha sat on her porch, a group of teenagers gathered around her. They listened as she spoke of her sons and their service, of the values they had fought to defend. Freedom isn't just given, she told them, her voice steady. It's the result of the relentless struggle of those who came before us. It's our duty to protect it, to stand up against those who threaten it, no matter how difficult it may seem. The young people nodded, their faces filled with determination. They understood the weight of her words, and they carried them in their hearts as they worked to strengthen their community. Brooksville was no longer just a quiet town. It was a place of resilience, of courage, and of hope. The people had been tested, and they had emerged stronger, united by the belief that they could make a difference. Martha watched the transformation of Brooksville with a sense of pride. She knew that her children's sacrifices had not been in vain. Their spirit lived on in every person who chose to stand up for what was right, in every young person who refused to be intimidated, and in every neighbor who reached out to help another. The town had been transformed, not just by the downfall of a criminal, but by the strength and unity of its people. And as long as Martha had breath in her body, she would continue to share her story, to inspire, and to remind everyone that true strength came not from power or fear, but from love, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Brooksville had been transformed, and Martha knew that this was only the beginning of a brighter future for them all. Under Martha's guidance, Brooksville began a new chapter. The darkness that had once overshadowed the town had been driven away, and now, in its place, a renewed sense of purpose flourished. The bad guys had been punished, and justice had been served. But more importantly, the spirit of solidarity, patriotism, and courage was ignited in every citizen. Brooksville was no longer just a peaceful place that could easily be invaded, but a strong community ready to stand up for each other. Martha became a symbol of what Brooksville could be. Her actions had shown the people that they could protect what was dear to them, that they could rise above fear and face threats with resilience and unity. Neighbors began looking out for one another, forming bonds that had not existed before. They knew that if they worked together, nothing could break their spirit. Community gatherings became more frequent, events where families shared meals, children played freely, and stories of courage were told and retold. Brooksville was not just rebuilding its streets and homes, it was building relationships, trust, and a shared vision for a better future. The young people of the town, inspired by Martha's unyielding resolve, became more involved in local matters. They took up roles as volunteers, joining initiatives that aimed to maintain the safety and prosperity of their community. Martha continued to be an active part of this new Brooksville. She spent her days mentoring the younger generation, instilling in them the values her children had fought for: honor, courage, and love for one's country and community. She spoke often of the sacrifices made by those who came before, ensuring that the young people understood the true cost of freedom. Her porch, with its old rocking chair, became a meeting place for those seeking guidance, wisdom, or simply a story to inspire them. As the months passed, Martha could feel the passage of time more acutely. She knew she didn't have much time left, but that thought didn't bring her sadness. Instead, it brought her peace. She had done everything she could to protect her family and her town. She had stood against the darkness, faced it head-on, and emerged victorious. And most importantly, She had planted the seeds of resilience in the next generation. She knew that when her time came, there would be young people ready to stand up and continue fighting for what was right. That knowledge gave her peace of mind. Life in Brooksville went on, but now every citizen carried with them a part of Martha's spirit, the spirit that never succumbs to evil and is always ready to stand up for justice. The town had learned a valuable lesson, that strength lies not in walls or weapons, but in the bonds between people, in the willingness to stand shoulder to shoulder in defense of what is right. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Martha sat on her porch, watching the children of Brooksville play in the street. Their laughter echoed through the neighborhood, a reminder of everything she had fought for. Nathan sat beside her, and they shared a quiet moment, watching the future unfold before them. The town was in good hands, and Martha knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, Brooksville would be ready to face them. Martha Jenkins, at 93 years old, had helped transform Brooksville into a beacon of hope and resilience. She had inspired a community to rise above fear and to fight for each other. And as she watched the town she loved, she knew that her legacy would live on, not just in the stories people told, but in the spirit of Brooksville itself. This was a new beginning, and it was only the start of what they could achieve together. The story of Martha Jenkins and the town of Brooksville ends with a powerful and clear message. Justice always prevails, and wrongdoers will ultimately pay for their actions. Despite her old age, Martha proved that true courage knows no age limit. Her bravery and determination inspired an entire town, helping them rediscover their strength and faith, empowering them to face life's challenges head-on. Martha's journey was not just a fight against a crime syndicate, it was a testament to the power of resilience, love, and community. She stood up against fear and oppression, demonstrating that it is never too late to fight for what is right. Her actions showed the people of Brooksville that standing together, supporting one another, and facing adversity with unity could lead to transformative change. Martha's courage rekindled the spirit of solidarity, patriotism, and justice in the hearts of every citizen. Under her guidance, Brooksville began a new chapter, one defined by hope and strength. The once quiet town had become a symbol of resilience, a place where people looked out for one another and refused to let fear dictate their lives. Martha's influence could be seen in the small, everyday acts of kindness that filled the community. Neighbors came together to rebuild homes, young people volunteered their time to help those in need, and the bonds of trust and friendship grew stronger. Brooksville was no longer just a town, it was a family, united by the lessons Martha had taught them. As Martha sat on her porch, watching the children play and hearing the laughter that filled the streets, she knew that her work had made a difference. The legacy she had built would live on, not just in the buildings that had been repaired or the criminals that had been brought to justice, but in the spirit of the people who called Brooksville home. Her children had given their lives for freedom, and Martha had honored their memory by continuing their fight for justice. She had shown that even in the face of great loss and adversity, it was possible to create something beautiful and lasting. Martha knew that she did not have much time left, but she was at peace with that knowledge. She had done everything she could to protect her family, her town, and the values she held dear. And she knew that when she was gone, there would be others, young men and women, inspired by her courage, who would rise to take her place. They would continue the fight, ensuring that Brooksville remained a place of hope, resilience, and justice. Life went on, but now every citizen of Brooksville carried with them a piece of Martha's spirit, a spirit that never succumbed to evil, that always stood up for justice, and that believed in the power of love and community. This was the lasting impact of Martha Jenkins, a town transformed, a people united, and a future that looked brighter because of her. The story of Martha and Brooksville is not just a tale of the triumph of justice, it is a story of love, sacrifice, and determination. These values will forever live in the hearts of the people of Brooksville, inspiring future generations to stand up for what is right, to protect those they love, and to never give in to fear. Martha Jenkins may have been one person, but her impact was immeasurable. She reminded everyone that true heroes are not always the young, strong warriors, but often those who, regardless of age or circumstance, stand up for what they believe is right and never give up on their community.